I didn't realize the exact moment when everything started to go wrong. There was no shouting, warning, or obvious sign. Life continued with an appearance of complete normality. I would wake up, work, pay, and repeat the process. Nothing seemed out of place at first glance, and perhaps that was the greatest danger, because silence can also be a warning. For a long time, I confused routine with safety. I believed that consistency meant control. If nothing was delayed, then everything was all right. If the money came in, then the problem was solved. I didn't ask deep questions, I just kept moving forward, overconfident. And that trust wasn't as solid as it seemed. There is a type of mistake that doesn't scare anyone. He doesn't interrupt the day or change the mood immediately. It settles in gradually like a comfortable habit. You adapt without realizing you're giving up space. Nothing hurts. Nothing requires an urgent reaction. And that's exactly why you don't react. I lived with this kind of mistake for years. The day everything stopped wasn't the beginning. It was simply the moment when pretending became impossible. Control had already slipped away long before. I just hadn't stopped to look closely. I preferred to believe that everything was under control, because believing was less work than verifying, and I chose the easiest path. This story doesn't begin with a sudden fall. It starts off with too much stability, comfortable enough not to raise suspicion, with small concessions made without reflection. Nothing extraordinary, nothing scandalous, just common choices made automatically, and the automatic transmission takes its toll later on. It's not a story about getting rich or going broke. It's about losing clarity while everything seems to be working. It's about trusting the flow too much and watching too little. It's about believing that you'll always be able to handle it tomorrow, until the day it's no longer possible. And when that day comes, he doesn't warn you. It just happens. I'm telling this story in the first person because it's a personal matter. Because there was no external villain nor spectacular tragedy. There was only prolonged distraction and silent consequences accumulated over time. Perhaps you'll recognize something similar, maybe not yet, but that's exactly where this story begins. If you're listening to this right now, stop for a moment. Not to judge nor to compare, just listen carefully. What I'm about to tell you won't be quick or comfortable. It's slow, human, and real, and it begins the day my money stopped working. But it goes far beyond that. I remember the sound before I understood what was happening. A short, cold, emotionless beep. The screen flashed a simple message. Transaction not authorized. I tried again, calmly, as if calmness could fix a mistake, and the world stood still for a second. I was standing there in the same place, wearing the same clothes as always. The day had been too ordinary to warrant a shock. I had left without haste, without fear, without urgency. In my mind, everything was fine. I was the type of person who pays, follows up, and resolves the issue. I had a job, a routine, a salary coming in. I was sure that I was in control. I looked around as if someone could explain it to me. People passing by, white light, hurried footsteps. Nobody knew that I was sinking inside. No one saw my stomach turn. I felt a warmth rising up my neck, and at the same time, a coldness on the back of my neck. It was as if my body understood before my mind. My first reaction was to think it was a system error. These things happen, I thought. An unstable app, a bad connection, anything. I opened my phone with restrained haste. He typed as if trying to prove a theory, and each second seemed to lengthen the air around me, as if time were waiting for my confirmation. I logged into the account and saw numbers that didn't match my memory. It wasn't zero. It wasn't total ruin. It was worse because it seemed normal at first glance. But there were small holes, added together, hidden, charges scattered like breadcrumbs along the way, and almost the entire limit has already been used up without me remembering when. The money hadn't run out, but it had stopped obeying. I closed my eyes for a moment and breathed softly. I tried to remember the last time I actually checked, not in an automatic, quick, distracted way. Truly, with attention and courage. I didn't remember. I just kept remembering to live as if all it took was getting more money next month. And that hit me with a silent shame. Right then, in that instant, I realized what I didn't want to admit. The problem wasn't that beep. The problem was everything that came before it. The tranquility that I used as anesthesia. The small choices I used to call just for today. The trust I placed was in numbers, not in control. And the shock came when I realized I had already lost a lot before that moment. After that cold warning, I kept walking as if nothing had changed. The body continued on autopilot, trained to appear normal. I still kept to a schedule, replied to messages, and cracked short jokes. From the outside, everything continued to function perfectly well. Inside, something had begun to crack without making a sound. It was a subtle, almost polite feeling of constant discomfort, like a faint noise that only I could hear. My routine was too stable to raise suspicions. I used to wake up at the same time, drink the same coffee. The route to work never really changed. The main bills were always up to date, or at least it seemed so. Nothing exploded. Nothing was alarmingly delayed. This stability gave me a false sense of maturity. I used to believe that predictability was synonymous with control. I didn't live in the visible excess that draws attention. There was no excessive luxury or scandalous spending. Everything was comfortable, clean, and organized enough. It was the kind of life that goes unnoticed by others. And that's precisely why I never questioned myself in depth. I felt safe because nothing hurt immediately, and the absence of pain became my main argument. Whenever an unusual expense arose, I quickly brought it back to normal. It's only this month, I'd say without thinking twice. There was always a reasonable explanation ready. A promotion, a necessity, a well-deserved reward. I was justifying it even before I felt guilty. And the more I explained, the less I observed. The habit of justifying began to replace the habit of verifying. I rarely stopped to look at the whole picture carefully. The balance was seen at a glance, never confronted directly. I preferred to trust the feeling that everything was flowing smoothly. I trusted routine more than real numbers. It was too comfortable not to ask difficult questions, and comfort has this dangerous power to lull vigilance to sleep. I let myself be swept away by him without realizing it. There were small, discreet, almost polite signs. Limits were used earlier than expected. Installments that silently accumulated. A slight tightening of the belt before the end of the month, always the same. Nothing that seemed urgent or dramatic. Nothing that would force me to stop and confront it, and I mistook silence for safety. I used to think that control meant not visibly suffering. I thought it was enough not to delay anything important. I thought that earning more would solve any imbalance. This belief made me too relaxed. I stopped monitoring because everything seemed under control. And that was the most dangerous part of the story, because that's where I started losing without realizing it. The mistake didn't enter my life as a tragedy. He arrived discreetly, politely, almost invisibly. It wasn't a big decision, nor a memorable moment. It was a small repetitive habit, too comfortable, something that seemed harmless when viewed in isolation, something that didn't hurt, didn't scare, didn't attract attention. And that's exactly why I never really questioned him. I started anticipating solutions to make the present easier. Paying in installments has become synonymous with organization, not risk. Splitting payments seemed like smart thinking, not procrastination. I became convinced that I was being strategic. In my mind, I was just optimizing the flow. It wasn't excess, it was practicality, I kept repeating. And each repetition reinforced that comfortable lie. The problem is that the habit grew without asking permission. What was once the exception became the norm without warning. I stopped feeling the real weight of the choices. Everything fit into the following month. It always fit. I was spending today counting on an abstract tomorrow, a tomorrow that was never carefully examined. Confidence in the future has become an excuse for the present. I didn't realize when I stopped making conscious decisions. The choices became automatic. It was easier to accept than to interrupt the flow. It's more comfortable to maintain the status quo than to revise everything. I couldn't remember exactly how many appointments I had anymore. They were scattered, diluted, almost invisible. Being invisible doesn't generate an immediate emotional alert. Whenever something felt tight, I would make superficial adjustments. They'd cut out one detail here, push another one there. Nothing structured, nothing profound, nothing definitive. It was like patching small cracks with tape. It worked for a while, and that reassured me. I was confusing a temporary solution with a real fix, and he continued on his way, too relieved to question it. I kept telling myself that I was aware. He knew exactly what he was doing. Everything was mapped out in my head. But the truth is, I avoided looking closely, because truly looking would require admitting discomfort. It would require changing, slowing down, backing down on some choices, and I didn't want to give up immediate comfort. The invisible mistake wasn't overspending. It was a case of stopping the honesty process. It was a trade-off between vigilance and daily convenience. It was a belief that external stability was enough. I didn't lose money all at once. I gradually lost clarity of mind in silence. And when clarity is lost, control goes with it. The loss of control did not come as a direct impact. It came as a slow, almost imperceptible pressure. Nothing was crumbling, Nothing was crying out for immediate help. It was a constant burden, installed without ceremony. I could feel it, but I pretended it was just ordinary tiredness. He attributed it to work, to the pace of life, to adult life. And so, I kept pushing the feeling forward. I started counting down the days until the next paycheck, not out of urgent need but out of a strange habit. It was a silent, almost automatic expectation. I saw no problem in depending on that cycle. After all, he always arrived, he always showed up. The money came in and for a moment everything calmed down. And I confused that relief with true balance. The accounts began competing for space with each other. Nothing was seriously delayed, everything was just barely left. I was balancing deadlines like someone balancing plates. Any sudden movement could knock something over. This tension has become part of my daily life. I could no longer fully relax, not even when it seemed safe. But I kept saying it was just a phase, just an adjustment. Whenever someone mentioned planning, I would change the subject. I thought the subject was too heavy for that moment. He said that I would organize everything calmly later. Afterwards has become a comfortable place to hide decisions. Meanwhile, I justified each improvised adjustment. Nothing seemed serious enough to stop everything. And so, improvisation became my main method. I began to negotiate with myself in silence. Internal promises that no one listened to anymore. Just one more adjustment and I'll have it sorted, I thought. These negotiations were never actually fulfilled. Something new, something urgent, something inevitable always seemed to emerge. And I accepted, too tired to resist. Denial became a form of emotional self-protection. There were days when I felt a nameless tightness, a vague discomfort, difficult to explain in words. It wasn't explicit fear, it was a constant unease. I avoided looking at long extracts, complete lists. I preferred small fragments, controlled information. Seeing everything at once seemed too dangerous, as if the complete vision could overwhelm me. I still maintained that I was in control, even though I hesitated. He repeated this like a silent mantra, not to convince others but myself. Each repetition weakened the truth a little more. I no longer had control. It had slipped away little by little, decision by decision, and I only realized it when the weight became difficult to ignore. The collapse made no noise when it finally happened. There were no shouts, urgent calls, or doors slamming. It was quiet, almost too respectful to be taken seriously. I only just started to feel the consequences fully settling in. Minor refusals, minor failures, minor internal delays. Nothing dramatic in isolation, but everything weighs heavily when added together. It was the accumulated result of a long time without facing it. The old choices began to demand daily attendance. What was once diluted has become too constant. I could feel the money leaving before it even arrived. It was like trying to fill a cracked container. No matter how hard I tried, something always slipped through the cracks. The frustration came without anger, only with profound exhaustion, a weariness that couldn't be relieved by rest. I realized I was always one step behind, running around trying to hold on to something that was no longer sustainable. Decisions became more reactive than conscious. I was putting out small fires all the time. There was no room for thinking, only for responding. And answering is more tiring than deciding clearly. But I no longer had the energy to stop. Tension began to creep into simple moments. Neutral conversations would become heavy for no apparent reason. I was easily distracted and lost focus frequently. The body was present, the mind always calculating. I smiled little, sighed a lot, and slept poorly. All this without admitting that there was a real problem, because admitting it meant facing the magnitude of the loss. I avoided talking about money, even to myself. The subject seemed to carry an inherent sense of shame. It wasn't a complete foul, it was a visible lack of control, and this subtly affects one's identity. I felt less capable, less organized, less confident. Even though no one pointed anything out, I could feel it. The emotional collapse came before the full financial one. Some nights turned out to be longer than they should have been. I would go to bed tired and wake up tired. My mind kept replaying scenarios that I was trying to avoid. Imaginary spreadsheets, deadlines, relentless numbers. Nothing exploded, but nothing got resolved either. It was a continuous state of low alert. How to live always expecting something to go wrong. There, I understood that the collapse had already begun. Not in the most extreme numbers, but within myself. The tranquility had vanished without warning. The money still existed, but peace did not. And losing peace costs more than I imagined, because she won't come back with a simple deposit. She's demanding something I've been putting off for a long time. Rock bottom had no clear shape or set time. He presented himself as a discreet and persistent isolation. I started avoiding invitations without realizing I was avoiding people. Any social spending seemed like an unnecessary risk. I used to make up simple excuses to stay home. He said he needed to rest, organize his thoughts, and save money. Actually, I needed to hide away for a while. Shame didn't shout. It whispered all the time. I felt exposed even when no one asked anything. Any conversation about future plans made me tense. I responded with vague and quick phrases. I'd rather not go into details, not explain the paths. It was easier to keep everything superficial. Therefore, nobody got close to what I didn't want to show. I began to measure every decision with silent fear. Not the fear of failing now, but the fear of failing later. That undefined later was taking up too much space in my head. I did mental calculations all day long, and yet nothing seemed to truly close. Insecurity has become a constant companion, a presence that I neither invited nor expelled. There were times when I felt very lonely. Even surrounded by people, I felt distant. I was carrying something that seemed incommunicable. It wasn't dramatic enough to ask for help. It wasn't simple enough to ignore. It was an uncomfortable and tiring middle ground, and I didn't know how to explain that out loud. I avoided mirrors for reasons I didn't understand. Not physical, but internal, difficult to name. There was a discomfort with who I had become, not because of a failure, but because of a failure to realize it sooner. I demanded maturity from myself that I thought I already possessed. This silent burden weighed more heavily with each passing day, and I couldn't find relief anywhere. Some mornings would begin with a tightness in my chest. Nothing intense enough to cause panic. Nothing is too small to be ignored. It was a constant warning that something was out of place. I took a deep breath and moved on. Moving forward became my only plan, even without knowing exactly where. At rock bottom, there was no final shock. There was accumulated fatigue and forced lucidity. I realized I couldn't pretend anymore, neither for me, nor for time. I was tired of improvising for survival, tired of justifying the unjustifiable, and it was there that I finally stopped running away. Awareness did not come as an immediate relief. It arrived heavy, dense, impossible to ignore. I stopped blaming the weather, the system, or chance. I stopped looking for a villain outside of myself. I sat in silence, without music, without distractions, and for the first time I looked at everything without running away. Not to judge, just to acknowledge. Accepting it was harder than admitting it. Admitting it still allows for some kind of elegant escape. Acceptance requires standing before what is real. I accepted that I had gradually lost control. I accepted that it wasn't bad luck, nor a bad month. It was a series of small, repeated choices. And that acceptance hurt more than any number. I stopped using soft words to explain the past. I no longer call it a phase, nor a temporary adjustment. I called it imbalance, without drama, without exaggeration. This took the weight off the fantasy and brought clarity. Clarity doesn't console, but it guides. She doesn't hug, but she points in a direction. And at that moment, that was all I needed. I sat down with paper and pen for the first time in a long time. No fancy spreadsheets, no complex apps, just raw, simple, uncomfortable numbers. I wrote everything down without skipping anything. Every commitment, every installment, every dependency. The shock wasn't the size, it was the dispersion. I had spread the control to too many places. There was no promise of grand change that day. No motivational phrases. No enthusiastic oaths. I was too tired for that. All I did was stop lying to myself. And that has already consumed all my energy. Accepting it took more strength than pretending, but it brought a different kind of silence, less aggressive. I understood that awareness doesn't solve everything, but it sustains. It prevents the problem from remaining invisible. As long as he is visible, he can be tracked. I didn't need to fix everything right then. I just needed to avoid looking away again. This decision was small, but honest. And honesty was the first real step. Acceptance changed the way I breathed. It didn't bring immediate calm. It brought presence. I was there, whole, without anesthesia. That hurt, but it also steadied me. I was no longer chasing after quick relief. I was willing to live with the discomfort, because running away was exactly what had brought me there. Consciousness didn't immediately restore control to me, but it gave me back something more basic and necessary, the ability to see without distortion. No rush to solve, no fear of looking. I was still halfway there, but for the first time I knew where I was, and that changed everything silently. The restart lacked an atmosphere of victory or enthusiasm. It started small, almost insignificant. Nothing changed from the outside in that first day. I stayed in the same place with the same routine. The difference lay in the way they walked through it. No rush to fix everything at once. Without the illusion that one gesture would solve years of problems. I stopped thinking about growth and started thinking about the foundation. It wasn't time to move forward, it was time to stabilize. I observed each movement more closely, not to punish me, but so I don't get lost again. Each decision began to carry a small weight of consciousness. This weight wasn't guilt, it was presence, and presence changes the way we choose. I started to reduce the noise surrounding money. Less distraction, fewer quick excuses. I accepted limitations without treating them as defeats. Limits have become a source of strength, not an enemy. I stopped pretending I could handle everything. Acknowledging this didn't diminish me as I feared. In fact, it brought me a new kind of stability. The footsteps were so small that almost no one would notice, and that was liberating in a strange way. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone, not even for myself at that moment. Each adjustment was silent and intentional. No promises of wealth, no grand plans, just the slow reconstruction of something more solid. I stopped counting on money that didn't yet exist. The future is no longer an argument for the present. I started making decisions based on what was available at the time. This brought clear boundaries and simpler choices. Not always comfortable, but more realistic. Reality began to feel less harsh, because I stopped fighting against it all the time. Control no longer means surplus or rapid growth. It came to mean clarity and predictability. I knew exactly where I was stepping, even though the floor was still narrow. This clarity gave me a different kind of peace. Not the peace of abundance, but the peace of awareness. And that gave me more stability during my days. Some days were still difficult and tense. The past doesn't disappear just because it's acknowledged, but I no longer felt lost within it. I knew what I was doing and why. This difference is subtle, but powerful. It changes the way weight is carried, and it makes it possible to move on without running away again. The restart wasn't pretty or inspiring. It was honest, slow, and quiet, and that's exactly why it was real. I wasn't rebuilding wealth, I was rebuilding internal control, and this doesn't show up in flashy numbers, but it supports everything that comes after. Today, when I remember that day, it no longer seems so isolated. It fits like a final piece of something bigger. The day the money stopped working was just a warning, a clear message about something that had been failing for a long time. It wasn't a betrayal by the system, nor was it just bad luck. It was the silent consequence of accumulated small choices, and understanding that changed the way I see everything. I learned that control doesn't make a sound when it's lost. He doesn't warn, he doesn't threaten, he doesn't create scenes. It drains away slowly while life seems normal, while the routine continues while nothing explodes. The absence of a crisis may be the greatest risk, because it dulls attention and responsibility. And I lived in that overly comfortable state for far too long. There was no clear villain in this story. There was no one to blame or accuse. What happened was prolonged distraction, an excessive reliance on the automatic nature of life. I confused stability with real security, and I paid the price without realizing when it started. This confusion is more common than it seems. Today I know that money doesn't suddenly stop working. It merely reflects, belatedly, what was previously ignored. He is responding to the way he has been treated over time. No judgment, no emotion, just a response. The collapse was not a punishment. It was a belated reflection of past decisions. And mirrors don't lie, they only show. I'm not telling this story to teach anything, not even to warn with pre-prepared phrases. I'm telling this story because she is human and silent, because many people experience something similar without naming it, because recognizing it sooner hurts less than later. There is no heroism in pushing yourself to the limit. Learning only happens when you stop running away. If there was one thing that came away from that experience, it was clarity. Clarity about limits, about rhythm, about attention. Clarity on how small choices build destinies, not dramatically, but consistently. The control I'm seeking today doesn't impress anyone, but it allows me to sleep without having to negotiate with myself. And that's worth more than any outward appearance. That day marked the end of a comfortable illusion, and the beginning of a more honest relationship with myself. I haven't gone back to being who I was before, because before, I wasn't truly present. I was just going with the flow without realizing it. Today, even with less room to maneuver, I walk cautiously, and that attention changed everything. Money started working simply again, not as a promise nor as a magic solution, but as a consequence of more conscious choices. The most important thing, however, was something else. I'm functioning again internally. No rush, no escape, no anesthesia. And it all started when I agreed to look back honestly.